Hi, my name is Prayer, and this is my story. It's a story that started 51 years ago, and it's a story that almost never started. Because when I was born, I was unwell. Doctors basically gave me back to my parents and said there was nothing else they could do. My parents had to reluctantly take me home. They tried other things like the time that I grew in, they even tried traditional medicine at the time. That didn't help. And so eventually they say that they resorted to, the last thing they could think of, which was prayer. They prayed to God that God would heal their son. My dad would often go to work not knowing whether when he comes back home, his son will still be alive. And he was a telecommunications engineer, and sometimes he would work out of town for a few days. And during those days, there were no mobile phones. So he would go away for a couple of days, really not knowing that he will come home and find me there. So, and I can't even begin to imagine what a stressful time it was for them. So, last resort, they prayed to God, and I became better. And eventually, I fully recovered. And it is then that they gave me the name Prayer. That's where the name comes from. Because to them, they said God answered their prayer. And so I grew up in a large household, always happy with siblings. But when I started primary school, I wasn't really intelligent. And I often struggled at school with lessons and just remembering things or understanding things. It was frustrating for the teachers as well. I remember the time my teacher would just tell me to go home and ask from home, or to go and ask my brother. My brother and I were in the same stream, but he was in a different class. So oftentimes then the teacher will tell me to go and ask my brother. But that was really embarrassing for me to be going and knocking at my brother's classroom to ask him something because I couldn't understand, or to go home as well. I didn't want to go home and say I've been sent away because I'm not able to answer some of the questions. So what I used to do, I would just go into the bathrooms, into the school toilets, and just hide in there and try to figure out the answer to the question. As a young boy, that was quite stressful. And really my self-esteem took a huge knock because during that time, then I grew up thinking I was not good at anything. But I noticed primary school at the time, there was 7 years. I noticed when I got to my fifth to beginning of the sixth year of primary, something happened. I don't know what it was, but it was like my mind had been opened. I started to understand things that were taught. And during those days, when we would take tests in class, end of term tests, the whole class was graded. So there were 50 of us normally per class. So if you perform the best, your exam report will be saying 1 out of 50. It was painful for me at the time because I would often get a report and I'm 45 out of 50, 46 out of 50, 47 out of 50. But as I said, something happened in my fifth, sixth year at primary, and my mind became clearer. I would understand things. And I'll go on from there to secondary school, and I did very well. In fact, by the time I took my GCSE exams, I had the best results at the school for everyone else. And there in that secondary school, I met a boy. That was first one who spoke to me about religion. I often didn't understand what he was talking about. I'll ask so many questions. And I remember he got frustrated at me one time because of the questions, then snapped at me and said, "Prayer, you are going to hell." That kind of stuck in my head, really, that statement. I was at a phase of my life, even as a young boy at secondary school. Within my heart, I just longed for more in life. I knew there was a God out there, but I just wanted to have that connection with God. And so then I met a girl in that secondary school that I really liked. And I remember this one time during school holidays, she invited me to what I would later on go to realize that it was a Bible study. It was a group of young people, all school going age, who were doing a Bible study. Then, as I said, from that secondary school, I went on to uni. In fact, from the secondary school that I went to, there were only two people who later on went to uni, myself and my brother. I get to uni, and I remember that freshman week, we spent it familiarizing ourselves with all the activities or the groups that were there at uni. And one of the first groups I got in touch with is the Scripture Union. And at that time, really, that's where I felt this desire to know God more. I gave my life to Christ at the time. And I've always heard people say that when you give your life to Christ, you are a new person. But I never really felt I was any different. I gave my life to Christ over and over again many times because I just never felt different. But then in that first year, I was not a committed Christian. I would go to the Scripture Union as and when I felt like it. But there were these two boys who would pass by my room in the uni accommodation and just encourage me to come along with them. And these two boys happened to be two of the young people that I met at the Bible school that this girl that I mentioned at secondary school that I liked it invited me to all those 4 years back. So they never gave up. They kept encouraging me. So sometimes I would go to Scripture Union begrudgingly. But little by little, I really began to get established in my Christian faith. And eventually I didn't need anyone to be encouraging me. I would go by myself. But I hope to encourage anyone out there. Sometimes the circumstances and the details of our lives are not as disconnected as they may seem to be. When I look back in my life, there was a reason why I believe God touched my mind all those years ago in primary school. And I began to be able to comprehend what we're being taught, because as a direct result of that, it led me being able to pass my GCSEs, to go on to pass my A-levels, then to go on to uni. And it is at uni in that first week that I found Christ. So I often look back and say, what was the reason that my mind was healed? Is it because so that I could have a career? To me, that's not it. That's just an extra. The reason for me is because that's the path that God set out for me to bring me to the point that I would meet him. So I would encourage anyone out there, when you look at your life, there are reasons sometimes you go through certain paths. And when God knocks in your heart, when you feel that tug in you that is drawing you to him, don't harden your heart. I found Christ in that first week of my time at uni, all those near 30 years ago. And I haven't looked back ever since. So this is my story. I just wanted to encourage you. Thank you.